Good morning to everyone. Before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, in whom we live and move and have our very being, we're thankful, dear Lord, that we can meet together this morning for just a few minutes and study a small portion of Thy will. We pray, dear Lord, that the effort that everyone made to be here this morning for Bible class, that it will be good for them and that they'll be able to leave with something that they can apply to their own lives, make them stronger this week and on into the future. Please forgive us of our sins. Help us to be mindful of those less fortunate as we go about our daily lives. All these things we ask in Christ's name. Amen. Did everyone get one of these little handouts? If anyone, I put two right there. We got more in the back. We'll get them. The purpose of the handout is really not to give you that much information, but I thought that if you wanted to make a few notes as we go through the class, you'll have something to write on. Need one right here, Dan? Okay, they got it. Okay. Lately, as I've been driving around, going about my normal business, I keep having this recurring thought, and I'm really, about the concept of old photographs or a snapshot or whatever. I'm really not that much into that, like maybe my wife and especially my sister-in-law, Retta. She's a picture maniac, but anyway, when you look at an old photograph, it's a strange thing. It's just like literally the people or the persons pictured in that photograph, time has stood still for them. I mean, that's where it is. Always will be the same as far as that picture is concerned. I wanted to expand that thought just a little bit and get everyone to think about the past year. I mean, this pandemic thing that we've all been going through, and good Lord willing, we're about to turn the corner. But think about that time period like you would a snapshot of a photograph, and think about it relative to yourself. And I'd like for us all to just do a self-evaluation of what we think about, the past year that we've just gone through. It seems like a whole lot longer than a year, but anyway, that's where I wanted to take. That's the direction I wanted to take the class this morning. So think about that as we go through this. You can see my first question there is, let's see if I can find my notes. I'm good at putting down notes, at putting down thoughts. I was talking to Rhonda about this morning. I can put all kinds of thoughts down on paper, but I'm not very good at evaluating them. But as far as the pandemic is concerned, what do you appreciate now at this point in our lives that we may have not appreciated as much pre-pandemic? Anybody have anything that, I'm talking about just everyday things in life. What do you appreciate more now than you did prior to all this happening? Anybody?
Life itself.
Huh?
Life itself.
Yeah, life itself.
I appreciate my children cared more about me, or I know they always cared about me, but they were so protective.
Right.
And they wouldn't let me go anywhere.
Right.
They kept me
Maybe too protective sometimes. That's good. That's exactly what I want to kind of dwell on, those sort of things. These are a few things just to stimulate your thought. These are a few things that I had come up with. A lot of times we don't think about our ability to work and provide. A lot of people had that taken away from them entirely. I know for 40 years I worked in the oil and gas industry. That industry was just completely decimated by everything that went on. Not only the pandemic, but then, people were scared to do anything, and it just suddenly I got to retire earlier than I anticipated. So that's what happened to me. like Retta said, life in general, day-to-day freedoms to come and go as you please. Another thing is your ability to hug and shake hands without thought about it. You know, you could shake hands, ma'am.
Miss all those hugs.
You miss it, yes, ma'am. You can shake hands or hug, and you don't have to run, go get, you know, some sanitizer. Pretty good. But anyway, you know, I thought about that. You know, in the New Testament times, there's a couple of references in Romans 16:16 and also in 1 Thessalonians 5:26 where they greeted each other with a holy kiss. Now, I'm not advocating, you know, that we kiss each other, but that's the way they greeted each other in New Testament times. And of course, now it's handshake, hugs. But I, like the rest of you, I miss all that. I miss that immensely. The concept of being able to invite people into your home, to be hospitable, that has been taken away from us. Starting to come back a little bit now. But, you know, whenever they come to the door, you know, you might say, have you been vaccinated? You know, or have you had COVID? You know, those are the kind of questions we're asking each other. Never thought that we would ever be in some kind of a time frame where we do that sort of a thing. Home has been a refuge, a place of comfort for all of us. You know, sometimes you know, you kind of are wishing, like I was maybe, that I wanted to get out from home, but still home was a safe place. Another thing I never thought about was technology. What has technology done for us during this time? It's enabled us to stay connected a little bit, be less isolated. Cody and his sons have done a tremendous job for us by being able to put these sermons and lessons on the internet. So if you were stuck in your home, you know, you had something that you could still, you know, go and in a way take part in the worship service. I mean, it was even live. It was streaming, but it was live. And that's a great thing. Like the rest of you, I appreciate more family now. Even extended family, the face-to-face contact. A lot of times elderly people have been disconnected from their children and grandchildren. Not because they wanted to be, but just like you were saying, they were trying to protect each other. Frontline workers. Do you ever give any thought to that? The frontline workers, they couldn't make that choice to not go to work. I'm certainly very much appreciative of them. Another thing that I missed, maybe some of you have also, the public events. You know, just anything, you know, football games, movie, you know, any other sporting event, a concert, anything that entailed a gathering of a group of people. We missed out on all that. But that's what happens, you know, in the post-pandemic, as we start to turn the corner. If you're like me, you've learned to appreciate folks. Your focus is more on the good things about people and less on the differences or the faults that people have. I think of people that we know, and I just like I just said, I just don't think as much anymore about the faults of people. I think more about the things that I liked about them. I miss them. I've told this story before, but it's a great story to relate again right now. My grandmother on my dad's side of the family, who I only saw a few times in my life growing up because she lived so far off. I remember years ago when my brother was about to get married, and he was getting married in Franklin, Kentucky, north of Nashville, Tennessee. So I went through Memphis, Tennessee, where my grandmother lived, and I picked her up, and we started across. Basically, Memphis is on one side of the state. You know, Nashville's clean all the way on the other side of the state, 200 miles away. So we started down I-40, and I don't know if any of you have ever driven down that way, but it's a beautiful drive down I-40. You look at the landscape, you know, the rolling hills. There's so many great things about many states. Tennessee is a beautiful state. And I mentioned to her, I called her Mamaw. I said, Mamaw, look how pretty that landscape is out there. And then she said something really profound to me. She said, you know, taking in that whole landscape is kind of like people. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, if we stopped the car and we jumped out and we ran up on that hill and we looked real hard at just one little spot, she said it wouldn't be so pretty. And she said it's like that with people. If we focus on one thing about somebody that we don't like, we don't see all the good. And I thought, wow, that was tremendously profound. I knew she was a good woman, even though I didn't really know her that well. But I knew she was a good woman because I could see what she had done with her children. She had 3 sons, one of which would have been my dad, and she also had an aunt that was, you know, one of my favorite aunts. I mean, tremendous people. I wished in retrospect now that it had been different and I could have gotten to know her a little bit better. But, you know, as we were going through this and I was talking with Rhonda about it, one of the things that came about was the theme of Ecclesiastes. You know, as we all know, written by Solomon, because God granted him all this wisdom, probably one of the most intelligent men that's ever been, you know, on this earth. But the theme of Ecclesiastes is that life is totally meaningless apart from God. And then at the end of Ecclesiastes, there in 12 verses 13 and 14, he sums it all up, that the whole of the situation, and this applies to all men, is fear God and keep his commandments. Anyway, as I got to thinking also, you know, about things, I'm a person that tends to take things for granted. When you take things for granted, what happens to you is that you're less likely to be truly in the moment. You miss out on the things that really matter. You miss out on enjoying people, places, events, things, you know, because you're there, but you're really not there. Kind of like that old saying, the lights are on, but nobody's home. And sometimes this is a hard thing for me to admit, but I tend to think that that's what I did for some of the years when my oldest son was alive. I missed out. I was there, but I wasn't fully engaged. And so, you know, that's what we do a lot of times when we take things for granted. Above all else, the thought occurred to me that we can't take God's grace for granted. You know, none of us are going to be able to see heaven without the grace of God. You know, we absolutely cannot, we can't earn heaven. We just can't do it. Now, we all try sometimes. I know I do, but I find myself all the time coming up woefully short. Ephesians 2, 8 and 9 is a good verse that came to mind at that time. If y'all want to turn to that with me, Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. That's a verse that basically talks about, by grace you have been saved. And it says, pretty verbatim right there in that passage, it is a gift from God. Heaven, or the idea of being eternally with God one day, is absolutely a gift from God. It is by God's grace that we're going to be granted heaven if we are. I always like the passage when Ron and I were talking. We were talking about a mansion being prepared for us. John 14:2 is a great passage. In my Father's house are many dwellings or mansions. And Jesus said, I go there to prepare a place for you. You know, one thing that can never be taken away from us, no matter how many pandemics we endure or how long it lasts, is that we are children of the King. And He has a mansion that He's prepared for us. He sent His only Son to die for us so that we might have remission of sins. And there's this just completely, there's no better gift than that. Anybody have anything? What are some of the things before we move to the next? Go ahead, Jeff.
You mentioned frontline workers. One day at school, we've been told we're going to take all these precautions. It will be safe for us to go ahead and have face-to-face classes again. We're gonna, if anybody in your classroom was diagnosed with COVID, we're gonna do a deep cleaning, and the room will be closed for 3 days and all this stuff. Well, I saw one of the janitors, custodian. She's Filipino, but she can speak some English. And she looked really sad. She was sitting by herself in the hall. And I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "I'm scared. I'm the person who has to go into all these rooms that they've closed and clean them. And I don't know if I'll die. And I can't because I have to send money to my family in the Philippines. And they depend on me."
Right.
And nobody thinks about the janitors.
That's true. That's true. But the school wouldn't be functional without her, or people like her. That's the kind of thing that I'm trying to get people to kind of focus on this morning in this class. There's just so many things in life that we absolutely take for granted. I mean, we get used to things being a certain way, and if you're like me, you don't like for all that to change. Well, all that not only has changed in the short run, but it's changed for the long run too. I mean, we've already gone. If you wanted to start this pandemic in January of 2020, I mean, what are we? 16 months out already, and who knows how long it will be perpetuated. Like I say, to me, it looks like we're turning the corner. But, sometimes you wonder, if the leaders of our land are going to let us turn the corner. They seem to want to perpetuate it. Yes, ma'am.
Well, think of all the things that were short or not available early on that we take for granted.
Right.
Too many supplies.
Yeah, I had that thought too. Is that we want to control things when things are out of control, and sometimes people do that by panic buying. Go and buy a bunch of groceries, go and buy 6 months worth of toilet paper. I was sitting there writing some of this stuff down, and I thought to myself, that's a news flash right there. You can't control the world by toilet paper. You can have all the toilet paper and your neighbor have none, but you're no better off than him. I read some people that they actually, during the pandemic, opened up a dialogue with people by knocking on their door and giving them their name and number and giving them a roll of toilet paper, if you can believe that. And it was just in the neighborhood, so to speak. I mean, I'm not talking about standing on the street corner handing out rolls of toilet paper. This was a way for them to reach out to their neighbors. Anyway, it's 10 till 10. That's about 15 or 20 minutes there. Let's move to the next. How has the pandemic changed your perspective? And a further question, do you plan to do anything differently moving forward?
I have a new shirt.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we fit the first one, we fits all of them. We've got to remember that Christ has all authority. He's in absolute control right now. We thought, back before the pandemic, everything was going very smoothly. The stock market's going up, everything looks rosy, business is booming. Looks like America is coming back to be on top. We forget God. God allowed the pandemic.
Right.
And we as humans had no control over it.
Right.
We couldn't stop it. We couldn't start it.
Right.
God uses 4 or 5 things to judge judge the world before final judgment. He uses the sword, he uses pestilence, he uses nature, he uses death. And he's in control. We aren't. And that's what we really need to remember, is that God is in control. He will take care of the righteous, but he also judges the world. He continually judges it. There's not going to be just one final judgment. He's not going to let sin multiply within a nation.
Right. Great points. You know, as I was trying to put some thoughts down, you know, there would be people asking, why did God let the pandemic happen? You know, the thought occurred to me, and as Ron and I were talking, he either orchestrates or he allows. You know, we something that's very hard for us to come to grasp with is that we live in a broken world. We're constantly trying to go about, you know, making it unbroken, but there's nothing that we can do about all the things that are happening in the world, including the pandemic. You know, we have to accept, like she just said, that we are not in control. We aren't in control. God is in control. I'm still learning that lesson. I'm fixing to push 67, and I'm still learning the fact that I really do not have any control over anything. And that's a hard thing to do. How has the pandemic changed your perspective, and do you plan to do anything differently moving forward? What does anybody think about that?
I
Jeff?
think I've become a hoarder.
Ma'am?
I think I've become a hoarder.
Yeah. I think a lot of us tend to do that. Jeff, go ahead.
Well, this might not be what you want to hear, but the government being so ready, or I won't say the government, but people who have the ability to put people in office, using these kinds of situations to expand their own power. I mean, it really has shown me that voting doesn't necessarily create the government that we have.
Right.
And you just can't rely on that. You can't depend on that. You can't depend on the government to be good or right or to represent what you want. I mean, they don't work for you. They work for the people who gave them the money to win the election.
Right.
And so, however they're going to use a crisis, you know that they'll always use it to make themselves more powerful.
Yeah.
And we just can't trust in the government. We have to trust in God.
Kind of falls into that, another one of those categories of things we don't have any control over. You know, we just had some great lessons. One of the things that the pandemic has brought out is, you know, we've been in transition with the new preacher coming May the 30th, Tyler leaving after some odd 13 years or something like that. Big transition for us, in addition to the pandemic and the situation of we not being able to meet like we normally would meet. But we just had some great lessons from Jody. One about being all in for God with your life. And then 2 lessons from Sam Starnes and Tracy Blankenship on redeeming the time. I think a lot of their lesson focus around Ephesians 5:15 and 16, and basically says, make the most of your time. And it says, be careful how you walk or how you live. Redeeming the time. And that's so important because
It's important because we live in a world where God made it. He doesn't guarantee us that we're going to be here tomorrow. Not one precious soul in this room is guaranteed that they're going to be here tomorrow. All we have is the hope of an eternal life through Him.
that's right. Good point. One thing that this thing has done to change my perspective is I always knew, I mean, you know, let's face it, you know, we're born and we're moving towards the day that we pass away. And so we know that we understand the certainty of death. But this pandemic thing has made me more cognizant of the value of the time that we're given. I mean, isn't it an overwhelming thought to think about that we have already lost an entire year? We've lost an entire year. Now I realize that a lot of people have gone on normal, just like normal. They may have even gotten COVID, but they were down for a day, two, or maybe even a week. But they came out of it, went right back to going about their normal business. But then there were a lot of people that didn't happen to. I mean, when you stop and think about, I looked up on the internet, I think to date, there's been somewhere in the neighborhood of 560,000 deaths due to COVID. Then I thought about Longview, 82,000 people approximately in Longview. So if you can entertain this thought with me, think about that. 82,000 people, and 560,000 people have died. That's 7 cities the size of Longview that have passed away due to COVID. It's an incredible thought. There's nothing that we've ever experienced in our lifetime that's had that kind of a death rate. I mean, go ahead.
How do we know that they're telling us the truth about those statistics?
That may be true. That may be true.
I found out that it's terrible that we missed our churches more than anything. And, you know, the people that didn't go regularly, they wish they could, you know.
Right.
It just, and that's one point I know. I try to go every Sunday. I did try to go every Sunday.
Yes, ma'am.
But during the COVID, you couldn't, you were afraid to.
Right.
And I miss that more than anything that I know of.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, even if the statistics are skewed, if you just look around if we just all look around, I'm sure all of us in this audience have probably known or lost people that we cared about due to COVID. I mean, it has hit people personally. I mean, just you and I, Ronnie, we lost Lynn's brother Johnny. We lost a good friend, Sam Satterwhite. We've lost, I mean, you could.
Sandy Sloan was a
Sandy
good.
Sloan. I mean, we could start and make the list. And with that in mind, it just changes your perspective from the standpoint of, you're talking about the value of time. Even though people went on during this year, they went on in a different way. They couldn't spend time in the way that we've always spent time. Our days were just different. And then we lost people, which has changed our perspective as far as appreciating the time that we have, that we can serve the Lord, that we can go out in public, that we can be with friends, we can be with family. It's just, it's a whole change of perspective with a deepening of appreciation for our church family, for the ability to serve the Lord, for the ability to have friends and family. It's just, I think the perspective has just changed and deepened probably for a lot of us.
You know, I'm not saying that you aren't right about the statistics being skewed a little bit. We'll never know that for sure. But we do know that the people that you mentioned, Johnny and Sandy Sloan, they walked into the hospital and didn't come back out. And then another thing that's profound to me is the type of death that they died alone. Family couldn't go. I mean, it's just a terrible thing. And it makes you really sit back, take a deep breath, so to speak, and put things in perspective about what this has done to us. But it's just made you think about your priorities in life. Your family. How you conduct your life with those that you come in contact with. Do you share what you have with other people? Not only of your material things, but of your time. You know, a lot of times people don't need anything but somebody just to give a little bit of their time to help them with something. Some of the ladies here in church, sometimes they needed something, a piece of furniture moved or their yard mowed or something like that. Didn't take but a few hours at the most, but it was something that we could do. And we could do that also during the pandemic. Big time, think about this. I think that we don't think about heaven enough. The pandemic gave people a chance to really think about heaven, think about eternity, think about, dwelling on the fact of one day being in the presence of God. I mean, just think about how awesome that will be.
Ronnie, can I share a quick story?
Sure.
Ronnie and I were driving along in Houston. This has been a few years ago. We were in one of the most elite parts of one of the most elite neighborhoods there in Houston. Huge, huge homes, kind of like estates on 5 or 6 acres. And we were driving down this road, and we were really admiring the beautiful homes. And down this driveway came this convertible BMW that was pulling out onto the main road, and it was full of these teenagers, like high school students. And my mind went to the fact of, I wonder what it would be like to be raised in this type of environment where every wish that you wanted, everything that you wanted, you had a mansion to live in, you had the finest cars to drive, and you didn't have to do anything for it. You just merely inherited it. It was because of who your father was. And all of a sudden, this thought came over me, and the thought was, my goodness, I am that person, because my Father in heaven I have this Father in heaven who gives all of us this great inheritance. And when we go to heaven, there's all kinds of scriptures that talk about the fact that we're going to receive this robe and a crown and the mansion that we're going to enjoy, and being in the presence of God, being able to kneel before Jesus and proclaim His greatness, and just the whole vision of what heaven will be for us. We have that inheritance, and we don't think enough about heaven.
No, we really don't. I know that, and once again, a lot of these points that I make, I'm squarely thinking about things relative to myself. I do not think about the idea of heaven enough. I'm so busy trying to make a broken world become unbroken, that I don't think about where, what life is really all about. One day we're either going to be forever with God, or we're going to be eternally separated from God. I mean, that's what has happened to me. The uncertainty of life has been heightened for me, because not only do we have the certainty of death, but now you throw in the pandemic and everything is uncertain. Whether it's real or not. Who knows whether it's real or not, but that's what has happened. I mean, anyway, all good points. I think about, when I mentioned the concept of uncertainty, there's a few scriptures that came to mind. I wrote down James 1:2-4. That's where it talks about the trying of your faith, worketh patience. And then Philippians 4:6-7. That's one of my favorite passages. It says, be anxious for nothing. I mean, there's not a whole lot of way that you can add or misunderstand that. Be anxious for nothing. And that's where I stand. I'm anxious for just about everything. And God tells me to be anxious for nothing. He basically tells you to turn worries into prayer. If you want to worry less, pray more. And then, of course, one of the best scriptures is Matthew 6:31-34. And it tells us to seek first the kingdom of God. And that basically means, in our language, turn to God first. if you have times of trouble or even in good times, we turn to God first. We take on God's character for our pattern in life. And we don't take any thought for tomorrow. Don't let worry affect your relationship with God. Let tomorrow worry about itself. Matthew 6:31-34. Pretty plain and explicit. By contrast, worriers, we've all known people that are worriers. I mean, they're just hand wringers, that type of person. They're just consumed, absolutely consumed. I'll be right with you, Carrie. They're absolutely consumed with fear and find it difficulty in trusting God. And all that planning and worry, it interferes with their relationship with God. Carrie, go ahead.
On that note, I was going to say, I'm the resident warrior,
Yeah.
And those two verses that you mentioned were like my anthem during the pandemic. And fortunately, a lot of us have this perspective of renewed faith and renewed hope. I miss my church family. I'm taking advantage of studying the time I have to be in the Word, where unfortunately there's a lot of people, even Christians, who may be warriors like me or just don't have the strong faith, that they do the opposite. Their time has not been spent in the Word. It's questioning their faith, or why has God allowed this? And it goes the other direction. It's not renewed faith, renewed hope. It's going downhill and spiraling with their worry, or using technology for the wrong things and not using it to connect to people when you're isolated, but to further isolate themselves. And unfortunately, I'm one of those people. I'm an extrovert and introvert, where I can deal with people, but I really prefer to be by myself. And so those two things, combined with the worry, I've really struggled during the pandemic. And trying not to isolate myself and forget about God and just hunker down with myself and my own thoughts, spiraling thoughts. So
Right.
I think those two verses have really been a big part of my life and have to continue to be, because sometimes people forget that just because we're Christians, we don't have these faults and these thoughts of uncertainty that just spiral.
Right. Good thoughts. Really good thoughts. I had the thought that, when we're sitting there hunkered down at home for the most part, through the whole situation of 2020, say, it gave you a chance to kind of look inwardly to add those things like the fruits of the Spirit to our lives. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. That self-control one always, kind of gets me, because there's times when I felt like I didn't have much self-control. But when you think back, when you think of uncertainty, and it starts to come on you, you can think back of another time in your life that you were uncertain about things. And you can reflect on how God turned that uncertainty into faith in Him and faith in His plan for your life.
Ronnie,
Yes.
I'm a person that faces reality. I don't have blinders on. I don't try to have blinders on. As of today in Gregg County, there are 11,000 cases of COVID. And I know a guy, in fact, his sister just got it. And there are that many cases here. So we're not over anything, okay?
Right.
People are not taking precaution, and I don't mean fear. There's a difference in fear and precautions, as the doctor
Right.
will tell you. We are not taking precautions, and the cases are going up as I speak, and they are real. They are not fake.
Right.
They are real cases.
Right.
And people are being too cautious, or not cautious enough to help other people.
Right.
It's not a vaccination anyway, but anyway, that's hearsay, but on other people. But I've studied it, and people are just being way too,
I agree.
they're not being cautious enough for other people. I think we as Christians need to not think of ourselves. We
Right.
need to think of others.
Right.
And what we can do to help other people. And we need to be cautious in what we're doing. We're not over this.
Right.
It's not over.
Right. And let me clarify, when I was saying maybe we're turning the corner, it's more of a thought of hopefulness. It just seems, maybe it's just the fact that we're just not as fearful, and maybe that's what I'm thinking,
I think it's cautious. We have to be cautious.
but anyway, yes,
Happy note, yesterday, I've been at the hospital all week, and yesterday was the first day there was nobody there to take my temperature, and, so turning the corner, I think that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because everywhere we walk in, we have to take our temperature. But, we're probably the healthiest generation in a long time, because what it brought to light is this vessel that God gave us, and how we treat it, and, our education about our bodies and what we do with it, take it for granted or not. I think now most of us don't take it for granted.
Right.
But and we're the cleanest
yeah,
we've ever been.
yeah.
On a cleanly note,
I used to have
appreciates that.
I used to have readers everywhere because I'm afraid to do LASIK, and now I got sanitizer everywhere. It's incredible. It's incredible. It's been 26 years since Ron and I lost our oldest son, and I think I can read this, but there was something that we found right after he had his accident, and talking about thinking of heaven. And he writes in a journal for our class, if I had a chance to go anywhere, I would go to heaven. The reason I would go to heaven is because it is supposed to be so much better than this world. There is a reason that I am not scared of death at most times. I want to go there so I can know everything and have no pain, worries, or night. He was 16, and I think when I read that he had kind of left his dad in the dust, so to speak. He was so much more profound thinker than I was. Danny, go ahead.
I think everyone is searching for peace everywhere, through all this. And we all know there's just one peace through Jesus. It's right here.
Right.
That's the only peace.
That's it. That's it. And that's what the pandemic can do for us. It can cause us to turn our thoughts inward, to realize, like we've said in this class, a number of people, we're not in control over anything. God is in control. He either orchestrates or He allows. We all know He's in control. We don't question that. So we just got to do our best to move forward and realize that He doesn't think as we do. Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, God's thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. And then I think about a passage in Romans 14, 8. Whether we live or die, we belong to God. That's where it is, right there. We see one side of the coin. We see what we see. We know what we see, but God sees everything. So. And another passage that is just unbelievably jumped out at me, if we think we're not on a different wavelength from God, consider Psalms 116, verse 15. And it says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of one of His godly ones. Now, we can lose loved ones, and we know that they've tried to live their life in accordance to God's principles. But as a knee-jerk reaction, if we could, would we bring them back? I think sometimes, that might be the case as far as I'm concerned. But precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of His godly ones. Think about that. Thank you all for your comments. Appreciate it.